know it's so early, James. Safe to say, though, the Nets are the team to beat in the East in your minds?
Probably. Like I don't disagree with that statement exactly. Like I think they are the biggest matchup problem of any team in the
Hmm.
East. I would not want to face them and like any circumstance if I were say the Bucks or the Sixers, or like I don't know if you want to put the Celtics in that conversation, the Heat in that conversation, if those teams can get their act together between now and the end of the regular season, like I would obviously be hoping that some other team would take them out and that my path to the finals would not involve having to deal with like those guys. Plus, oh, by the way, there's Joe Harris on the weak side who like we it's not even like we have an option to just not help off of him. You have to, because you can't just not send help when James Harden or Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving is initiating the offense. It's just you have to then trust your rotations to not give up a wide open Joe Harris three that's going to go in more than half the time. So I think they have not been like good enough defensively for me to say they're definitively the best team. But like by the way, the Milwaukee Bucks have not been this dominant defensive team that they have been in years past either. So
Hmm.
it is not as if I have a great answer for you as to who the favorites would be if not them. The Sixers have been the best team so far, but it's not as if we don't have questions about them either, particularly I think in terms of their second unit and what that will look like come playing time and who they can kind of get away with playing. So, it feels early to me to declare anyone like a cut above the rest. I want to see what some of these teams can figure out before the trade deadline and even in the buyout market, because these are the teams will be kind of competing against each other for those guys. Boston has a massive trade exception they might use. Brooklyn has a smaller one and a disabled player exception with the Spencer Dinwiddie injury. So I think there are a bunch of teams that have moves to make. But like if you're telling me you look at the way Brooklyn has played on offense and they're your favorite to go to the finals, like I mean, Draymond Green called them the team to beat after playing them. Like I don't disagree with that.
It is, especially the East. It is very muddled at the top. It should be, especially if the Bucks can kind of turn it around. It'll be a lot of fun. Kind of see like a Sixers, Bucks, Nets three-headed match to see who comes out of that in the East. Two more quick questions here for you for talking James Herbert, CBS Sports.com NBA reporter. Just how much does team record impact the MVP vote? Because ESPN did a straw poll last week. Early again, very early. Understand, but Steph was seventh in that just one first place vote. And you look at his numbers. His numbers are close to what he's setting, career highs in 2015, 2016 when he was the Giannis MVP. But personally, I think it's the record of the Warriors because they're in that 7-8 range. How much does team record impact your vote personally for a player's MVP candidacy?
It impacts it some, but I think it's contextual. Like I don't think you hold every player to the same standard. I don't think it is simply a matter of picking the best player on the best team, because if it were, we would be debating whether it's Mike Conley, Rudy Gobert, or Donovan Mitchell right now, and that's
Right.
not the conversation that anybody's having. I don't mean to be glib about it, but like there is a like reason why the Warriors are like 19th in offense or whatever when Steph is on the court, and then like worse than the worst offense in the league by far when he's off the court. Like he is still doing like basically like heroic work to
Oh
drag
yeah.
this team to where it is. Even though where it is nowhere near championship contention. Like
Hmm.
to me, in a lot of ways, what he has done this season is just as impressive as what he did in 2015-16. And I don't say that lightly because that's arguably the best regular season that anyone has ever had in the history of the game. Like from a statistical perspective, like it was absolutely nuts. And I think now, like some of the stats are similar, some are not quite as impressive, but I think the degree of difficulty is just inarguably higher. He is having to create more of his own
Hmm.
offense. He is obviously running more pick and rolls than he ever did. He is taking more contact. He is having to deal with like far inferior spacing. He's having to deal with teams. He always attracted a lot of attention, but he wasn't seeing box and one coverage in the regular season on a regular basis, like,
Hmm.
or really at all,
Yeah.
until now. And that's partially a result of like, oh, hey, this worked against a depleted Warriors team in the finals 2 years ago. And it's partially a result of like, all right, you're going to put out this lineup with Steph and like 4 guys who can't shoot, obviously we're going to play a box and one. Like that just makes sense. So I mean, the fact that he is seemingly able to find his rhythm at will, regardless of what is going on around him, the fact that over the course of this season you have seen this. And again, it depends on the opponent. Against like elite defenses, it's harder for them to get to this level. But like in general, you have seen the team learn how to play with him. Guys who have historically been viewed as not super intuitive players who have spent their whole careers playing in like, pretty unsophisticated like offensive systems where it's predicated on just running high ball screens and spacing the floor. They're now operating in like Steve Kerr's like Warrior system that he had been running with Draymond and Iguodala and Livingston and Steph and Clay screening for each other. And it's not the same when it's Steph and Brad Wanamaker screening for each other. It's not the same when when you don't have those sort of veterans who just make the correct read every single time. And to see the role players improving and to see the system looking better, to see the Warriors force stretches at least in every game looking like the Warriors, like that has been really fun to watch. And I think that is a testament to a coaching staff sticking to its guns somewhat in the face of this sort of withering criticism at the start of the season. But it's really a testament to Steph probably working harder on offense than any player in the NBA when you take into account just the sheer amount that he is running, the increased offensive load on him, and the degree of difficulty of the shots that he's taking. It's wild. So this is me making the Steph for MVP argument, but it is also not me saying that I would necessarily vote him first. I think you can have a good conversation about Embiid, Jokic, LeBron, Steph, and then maybe after that we could talk about, does the best player on the best team, which to me is Rudy Gobert, does he deserve to be at the end of your MVP ballot, or would you rather give it to somebody like a Damian Lillard, who is also like Steph on kind of a decent team right now and dealing with like very imperfect circumstances? But yeah, I think obviously like team record comes into it when you're discussing the context of the stats that you're seeing, but it does not by any stretch mean that Steph Curry should be like 7th or 8th or outside of the picture here. He's been out of this world.
James, I'm 100% with you. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. Just 7th. It's like, you're right. Like he is working harder than ever. The numbers are even more impressive because you're right. It's either him or Kelly Oubre. Who do defenses want taking the 3? That's an easy answer. And he's still working to get his shot and get enough. Finally here, James, I want to end with this because I'm confused. Maybe you can add some clarity here. Obviously, Draymond Green's comments about, the double standard with teams and players, specifically when it comes to trade talks, got a lot of play this week. LeBron James essentially backed it up earlier this week as well. I'm just curious, do you get what Draymond Green is saying, at least in terms of specific, when it comes to players and teams talking about trades? I guess my thing is, I don't understand what more teams could do to cater to players when it comes to trades. Like, we haven't seen a player demand a trade and not get traded. So, like, I guess from Draymond's perspective, like, what is he upset about? Or what could, I guess, teams do to have him be happy that the playing field is, I guess, level when it comes to trade talks?
I didn't take it as him being mad at teams per se, aside from like specifically being mad about teams leaking stuff to the media. The way I took it was Draymond Green's frustration with kind of like the way things work, and being annoyed, frankly, with people like us and the way that we talk about this stuff. And like, to me, like it's interesting because Draymond has been sometimes a very vocal critic of of the media, while also being extremely generous to the media and being like moonlighting as a media member himself. And by the way, being incredible at it. Like
100%.
If he wants a job on Inside, I'm sure he will walk right into it, because when he's a guest on that show, he's amazing. But the way I saw it is he saw like sort of a double standard that if he were to go to the media and say, I want out, trade me, he would immediately be fined lots of money. So we had this ridiculous sort of show in Houston that he was referring to earlier this year, where We all knew Harden wanted out, but he couldn't technically say it until he did, and the whole thing blew up at the end. But he went through like dozens of media availabilities and said basically nothing. You can't address it. It's the elephant in the room. But there are these weird rules where we can all know that this thing is so, and yet the players cannot acknowledge it as such. And I think it's a little bit awkward. And I think the criticism that Draymond sees players getting for, basically dogging it, or, their heart's not in it or whatever. And it's not necessary. It doesn't necessarily take into account the sort of human aspect of it. Like, I think what he was trying to get at was like, yeah, like, okay, look at the Andre Drummond situation. I think we could all look at that and like see his play is not what it was in his last 5 games that he played for the Cavs versus what he was doing in the first 5 games of the regular season. A completely different guy, right?
Right.
And I think from his perspective, it's like, well, why should it be the same? Because the team has basically told him, you're not part of our plans. We have traded for another player that plays your position, and now you are not allowed to do your job, basically. And now he's literally not allowed to do his job. Like he is just not playing.
But
everybody
in that
knows
specific instance, right, James? Because he referenced, like you said, it seems like, I mean, I could be wrong here. It sounds like the Draymond or the Drummond situation specifically was the thing that kind of set him off into starting this rant. But to your point, they're the Cavs are sitting him down. They're not asking him to go out there knowing a trade is looming. It's, hey, we're going to trade you, so we're going to sit you until we can figure this out and do you with like, isn't that doing right by the player in that instance? Am I missing something there?
Yeah, I don't think that it is wrong for the Cavs to act in their own best interest, and I don't think it was really in Andre Drummond's best interest for them to keep parading him out there playing next to Jared Allen.
Right.
Like that was a disaster, and we all knew that was going to be a disaster when they were trying that. But again, like what I would say is I don't think Draymond was exactly criticizing just the Cleveland Cavaliers and them wanting to make the move that is best for their organization. I think what was bothering him was kind of the dynamics and what he saw as a double standard. And that's all I would say is like, we can talk about like whether or not like he is right. I agreed with some of what he said, not 1,000% of it. But I don't think it was just a matter of like, oh, players should not be able to hold a guy out, or like the Cleveland Cavaliers have done Andre Drummond wrong. I think what Draymond saw were a bunch of reports that referred to Drummond's attitude and Drummond's like, poor play in recent games leading to this. And I think, not to put words in his mouth, but I think he was sort of alluding to this being like, well, why should he have a good attitude about this? Why would you expect him to give everything he has to this organization when they don't care about him anymore and he's not in their plans, right? So I think that was what, like, that's how I read it. But I can certainly understand if you saw those quotes and you thought he was just mad at the Cavs. But I don't think it was so much about the Cavs in a literal sense as much as he was mad about this sort of dynamic.